This video is brought to you by Nebula. On Monday, Volkswagen announced that it was considering shutting factories in Germany for the first time in the company's 87-year history, warning its employees that drastic cost-cutting measures would be needed to cope with what it described as a very demanding and serious situation. This comes only a year after the launch of another, apparently insufficient cost-cutting program, and would contravene a long-running deal with unions not to cut any German jobs before 2029. Volkswagen's announcement wasn't a total shock. Operating profits at the car-making behemoth, which today owns a whole load of other brands including Porsche, Seat and Audi, was down 20% year-on-year in Q1. And in July, the company said it was considering closing an Audi factory in Belgium, its first factory closure since 1988. Volkswagen's stock has fallen 60% since 2021, and its market capitalization now sits at just over $50 billion, below not just Chinese car companies like Xiaomi and BYD, but also European competitors like Ferrari, which has a market cap nearly double that of Volkswagen, despite only taking in about 2% of its revenue. So in this video, we're going to have a look at what's gone wrong with Europe's largest car maker, and why things are unlikely to get better anytime soon. As we see it, there are two big reasons Volkswagen is in trouble: its EV-related woes and China. Let's start with EVs. Like basically every big European car maker, Volkswagen has struggled to move away from combustion engines towards EVs. While VW's EV sales essentially tripled between 2020 and 2023, they've since stagnated, with year-on-year deliveries falling slightly in both Q1 and Q2 of this year. This means VW sold something like 235,000 EVs in the first half of 2024, well behind EV behemoths like Tesla and BYD, but also behind European equivalents like BMW, which sold just over 300,000 units. This means that VW's EV sales represent just 6.5% of all vehicle sales, which isn't great news for a company that said in 2022 it wanted to be selling exclusively EVs by 2033 and have EVs account for 80% of European sales by 2030. This is in part because VW's EVs are relatively expensive, but it's also because VW has tried and struggled to bring all the new EV-related processes in-house. In 2021, for instance, it created a subsidiary company called Cariad to design software for its cars, and a year later it created another subsidiary called PowerCo to design and manufacture its batteries, with plans to spend 20 billion euros on 5 factories by 2030. Bringing everything in-house instead of outsourcing it, a practice known in business lingo as vertical integration, isn't necessarily a bad idea and can act as a sort of hedge against supply chain disruption. Both BYD and Tesla now make most of their components in-house. Tesla, for instance, makes 68% of the components in the latest Model 3, and BYD makes 75% of the components in the Seal, its flagship model in China. For context, Volkswagen currently only makes 35% of the components in its ID.3 EV. However, this strategy hasn't worked out so well. Bloomberg reported in January that PowerCo was holding off on outside investors due to doubts over its ability to produce batteries competitively and at scale, while Cariad has been almost an unmitigated failure, with recurring delays, overspend, and futile management shakeups. Earlier this year, Volkswagen tacitly gave up on Cariad, signing a software deal with Chinese EV maker Xiaopeng to jointly develop their next generation of cars. This speaks to a more general problem for the European car industry. While legacy European car makers are obviously great at engineering what we might call the hardware of a vehicle, they're less good at the tech and software inside the car that today defines the user experience. All this relates quite directly to Volkswagen's second problem: China. As we just mentioned, VW is having its EV market share squeezed by cheap Chinese competitors like BYD, Wuling, and Li Auto, who all outsold VW in the first half of this year. You might therefore expect that Volkswagen would be very much in favour of tariffs on Chinese EVs like the ones recently imposed by the EU. But the reverse is true. Volkswagen, along with other big German car makers, are actually staunchly opposed to the escalating EU-China trade war, because even if tariffs help protect their market share in Europe, retaliatory tariffs could hurt their lucrative business in China. Volkswagen was one of the first Western companies to start doing business in China in the 1970s, and today depends on the country for at least half of its annual profits. VW's Chinese business is already being squeezed by local alternatives, both because they're cheaper, but also because the trade war has inspired a sense of economic nationalism amongst Chinese consumers. In reaction, VW have announced a new In China for China strategy, investing billions in new Chinese factories. But VW has nonetheless been losing market share, going from almost 20% of the Chinese market in 2020 to less than 15% last year. VW has tried to partially offset this decline by refocusing on its other two big markets, Europe and North America, but to little avail. Only a couple of days ago, VW's finance chief Arno Antlitz admitted the company expects its annual European sales to fall by 500,000 units compared with pre-pandemic levels, and VW's American efforts aren't going much better. While SUVs have helped boost sales a bit in the past few years, VW's partnerships with American brands like Scout, a relatively well-known brand in the 60s and 70s, and Rivian, an upper-end EV company, haven't fared well. VW is still yet to produce a new Scout car, and Rivian lost more than $1.4 billion in the first quarter of 2024, losing more than $38,000 per vehicle sold. So, can VW recover? Well, no one knows the future, but there are reasons to be pessimistic. Turning around any massive company is difficult, but VW is in a particularly difficult position because of its uniquely complicated governance structure. For context, VW has a two-tier system of voting and non-voting stock, which gives disproportionate influence to the two dominant shareholders, the billionaire Porsche Piech family and the German state of Lower Saxony, who together control roughly 3/4 of the voting rights despite owning less than half the equity. This weird setup makes it harder for the company to make big decisions, even if they're in the best interests of the company and its shareholders. VW has known for years that its German factories, which employ some 300,000 people, aren't sufficiently productive. Leaked internal emails from 2020 claim that the move away from EVs would mean the loss of 30,000 jobs in Germany, and it takes VW's German workers 3 times as long to produce an EV as Tesla's American workers. Nonetheless, moving production out of Germany will be furiously resisted by the Lower Saxony government and well-organised German unions. To be clear, we're not saying that unions are intrinsically bad, just that in a time when VW has, in its own CEO's words, a year or two to turn things around, it can hardly afford a drawn-out battle with its unions and the German state. Now, that's not everything. We've actually got a new series called WTF USA, and you can watch the trailer for that right now.
Look, as British people, we often cast a wary eye at our friends across the Atlantic. But honestly, the last few months have been especially wild. We've seen Biden bail from the race after a terrible debate.
My fellow Americans.
The red-blue divide making way for lurid green. Trump accusing Kamala of changing her race. Vance getting accused of couches. Endless memes about coconut trees, and endless arguments over crowd sizes.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes.
Obama making a joke. Trump talking about Biden like an ex he misses. RFK Jr. potentially having worms in his brain before admitting to burying a bear in Central Park. Oh, and an assassination attempt that we all kind of forgot about because of all of the other chaos. I mean, honestly, WTF USA. The thing is though, while it might be tempting to just roll your eyes at these shenanigans, these aren't just meme-worthy moments. And you know I'm serious, because I've not stood up in a video since COVID. But these incidents actually pose important questions, like how much does the Gen Z vote matter this time round? How important will online campaigning and social media prove to be? What impact do running mates have? Okay, I don't have words for that one. These are the kinds of things we'll be explaining in our new Nebula original series, What to Follow USA, only on Nebula. Each week, we'll take the moments that have been dominating internet discourse and explaining the true politics under the hood. Look at me pandering to the American audience. We'll be releasing new episodes of What to Follow every Friday through to the election. The fact that it's on Nebula means we've been able to take more risks with this series. The tone and attitude of the show isn't what you'd expect from TLDR. I'm not sure we've talked about fucking couches on YouTube before, but the journalism and reporting is exactly the standard you'd expect. Nebula support also means that we can do things differently, create additional content for you, and tackle topics that the YouTube algorithm just wouldn't normally allow for. It's not just this new series on Nebula either though. There's also incredible originals on the platform like Modern Conflicts from Real Life Law, or the upcoming documentary from Tom Nicholas, Boomers, which takes a provocative look at the lives and legacy of the baby boom generation. Plus, we also post all of our normal content on Nebula ad-free, and often before it ends up on YouTube. If you want to check all of that out, plus WTF USA, then head to go.nebula.tv/WTF, or click the link in the description. That way, you can pick up an annual Nebula subscription for a huge 40% off. We're really happy with how this new series has turned out, so please do give the series a look. We'd really appreciate it.